I hear something there, just bear with me.
Hello.
Hello, you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay, Andre?
Hi, everybody. Just waiting for everyone to take their seats. I think we're ready to go, so we'll try and stick to our schedule. My name is Ciara O'Flynn. I'm the Director for Latin America and the Caribbean here in the Department of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for joining us in person and virtually. We're really delighted to welcome everybody here today. A special welcome, of course, to Minister Cecilia López, who is in Ireland for a visit primarily to attend the OECD Conference on Rural Development, but also with an important bilateral program, has come from the Oris this morning where she met President Higgins, and we're really very grateful for your visit and your engagement and your interest in Ireland. I would also like to welcome our own Secretary General Joe Hackett, who will be participating in the panel, and Secretary General Mary Hurley from the Department of Community and Rural Development. And then coming in virtually, we will have Andres Sanabria from the OECD, who led on the rural policy review of Colombia last year and is Colombian himself as well. So we'll have some good insights for us too. Other people to mention are Ambassador Patricia Cortez, Ambassador of Colombia in Ireland, who's played a huge role in this program and in all of the programs and visits that we've done together. And our Director General for Ireland, UK and Americas, Rory de Burca, who'll speak shortly to welcome the Minister and to introduce her before her remarks. I'd also like to thank and welcome again those of you who are joining us virtually, especially from Colombia, where I know we have many people watching this morning, where it's relatively early. So I wanted to say bienvenidos y gracias por acompañarnos hoy, and we look forward to keeping in touch with you as well. We will have time for Q&A after the presentations from the panelists in the room and also on Slido. So again, would encourage people who are joining us virtually to submit your comments, and you can do that by typing them into the box on the right side of your screen. A few housekeeping points for those of you who are here in Ivy House. We have emergency exits on either side of the ballroom, just in case. I'd also like to note that we are recording this discussion and it will be available to view publicly on our ireland.ie webpage after the event today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Rory de Burca up to the stage to introduce Minister López, and then we'll hear from each of the panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Ciara, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those in Colombia. Es para mí un gran honor de dar la bienvenida a Su Excelencia la Ministra Colombiana para Agricultura y el Desarrollo Rural. It's my great pleasure to welcome Cecilia López, the Colombian Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development, here to Ivy House. You're the first minister from the new government in Colombia to visit us here, and thank you very much for taking the time to make this trip, which is a real symbol, I think, of the ever stronger relationship between our two countries. I know a key focus of your visit is this OECD Conference on Rural Development, which the government is hosting in Ireland this week. And the theme, I think, is particularly resonant, building sustainable, resilient and thriving rural places. And that in some ways frames, I think, the discussion for us here this afternoon, because they are linked very closely to that overarching theme of your visit. But I think we are here to talk about rural development and peacekeeping with a particular focus on where Ireland and Colombia can meet. And thank you for giving us that opportunity. As a recently appointed Minister for Agriculture and Rural Development, I know, Minister, you're bringing forward ambitious plans and policies for rural development in Colombia. And I know that's intrinsically linked to your government's plans for the peace, and particularly how the potential of rural areas to come up the value chain can also help embed the peace that you're working on. You bring a huge amount of experience to your role, a CV that's real evidence of your dedication to public service. You have been already Deputy Minister for Agriculture, Ambassador of Colombia to the Netherlands, Minister for the Environment, Director of National Planning, and you've held various positions across the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank and other international institutions. And we really look forward to hearing your insights drawing on that wealth of experience. You have been honoured to be a recipient of the Cross of Boyaca, which is, of course, the highest award granted by Colombia to its citizens for their service to their country. Well done on that. Before I hand over to you, just to say that this is a fantastic moment in Ireland-Colombia relations. You know, I've been privileged to walk along the journey over 20 years. I've been to Colombia a number of times, and every time I've been to Colombia, and now here as Director General, I've seen the progress and the ever-deepening relations between our countries. And, you know, we're now building, I think, on really deep ties in terms of cooperation, shared experiences and peace building. We have strong historical ties and growing economic, cultural, education, and above all, people-to-people links, which your visit today will help us consolidate. Speaking of people-to-people links, I would like to acknowledge Ambassador Cortés. Patricia, you and your team, together with our own Irish Embassy in Bogota, hello, you know, deserve special thanks for what you've done since both embassies opened up to help cement those links. And today's visit, I think, is a further part of that joint endeavour. And finally, before I go forward, just to mention that as an exemplar of those strengthening ties, not just between Ireland and Colombia, but Ireland's vocation to strengthen our ties with all of Latin America. This year, we did launch our first ever Latin America and Caribbean strategy, which is a framework for us to deliver across the region, but particularly with our friends across 5 key objectives. Colombia is a particular friend of ours in taking forward this strategy, and your visit to Ireland so soon after your appointment, and indeed the attendance of our Minister Frank Fian at the inauguration of President Petro, is clear evidence of how much attachment we give to this bilateral relationship. Minister López, Joe, Mary, Andres, thank you very much for being here. Ministra, have a say.
Well, thank you so much for this warm welcome. It is really a privilege to be here, especially since we only have been a little more than a month in the new government, and it seems to be a year. It has been so intense. So really, this is a very good moment to present some of the big lines that we are trying to follow in our development. So can we have the presentation? Okay. So what I want to talk is about a new vision for Colombia's agricultural sector. So really, we're trying to, can we have the next one, please? We try to organize in 5 points. The next one, yeah? I don't, oh, here, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
How is it? You know, I think that the only thing that I am like man is that I can't do 2 things at the same time. So for me, it's very difficult. Okay, let me get closer. Okay, no, the former. Yeah, we try to organize in 5 main points what we want to do. Okay, the first point is rural reform. Rural reform, that really the main issue is rural, it's agrarian reform. Colombia hasn't been able for centuries to really distribute land. And Gini for land in Colombia is really terrible. It's 0.89, which means we have a very concentrated land indicators in the country. So this is the main issue, to start distributing land. We want Colombia, and this is something that the president has said very often, we want to be a superpower in food production, but at the same time, this can be part of the peace process, because the rural sector was the one who suffered the war, and we still have indicators of war. We haven't reached the peace as we would like to. So this is part of the process of coming back to peace process again. The second point is that the main issue are the small, not the small, they are large, but those farmers that were left behind. So we have indigenous people, we have Black people, we have peasants that were not the priority in the last 30 years, really. And we're trying to bring them to the development process in the rural sector. And this means we have to follow the line of rights, human rights, peasants' rights that, you know, were approved by the United Nations last conference. And then we have the state being the responsible for the main policy strategies that we are going to follow. The third one has to deal with sustainable development. This is quite a challenge for the Minister of Agriculture. I was Minister of Agriculture at the late 90s, and when the president called me, I said, oh, come on, I had been Vice Minister of Agriculture, Minister, I don't want to come again. And you know what he said? This is a different minister. And he was right. This is a huge minister that has to work with environment, that has to work with justice, that has to work with education, health, and all other sectors. So the third point is the sustainable agricultural development, that we have to really be in a new way, because we want agriculture for life and for everyone. That seems a very simple sentence, but it's a very comprehensive strategy. The fourth point is, how are you going to link big production, big agricultural production with medium and small production? So you really have to move with change, productive change. There is where you have to make the link. And then you have to work in innovation. That's where we need your help. Innovation, we have to work with infrastructure that is very poor in the rural sector. We have to really get agricultural growth, credit and risk management. So really, we have to make a really very diversified rural policy. And the fifth point is territory. We have to move from this centralized policy to this decentralized, looking at the specifics of each territory. Okay. No, I would like, about these 5 points, I would like to make emphasis in 5 specific issues. First, agrarian reform. What we want to do is, because we have to understand that land becomes the vehicle for development, because this has been, I'm telling you, it's so concentrated. We have huge farms with very few hands, and we have the very small peasants in very small pieces of land, to put it in a way. So this agrarian reform has 3 elements. The first one is land formalization, to give title to the people that have been in land, but they have been in an illegal position and haven't been able to receive all the package of help that the government should give them. The second point is the redistribution of lands that was captured from narcos. and to be distributed. It was captured by the government. This is a challenge. I was telling the president, if this is the main thing I have to do, you have to put the army behind me, because this is not going to be easy. Okay, and the third one is the more modern way of doing it, that is multi-purpose cadastro. The land price in Colombia is very far away from the commercial real value. So this cadastro will bring the value to the real, to close as possible to the market value, and then you will have an increase in taxes, especially in those areas where development has occurred. What happened at that moment? At that moment, the owners of that land will have to pay high tax, and then they will have to decide by themselves if what they produce is enough to pay the high tax. If it is not enough, they can take the production and maybe make it more productive, or you can sell it in the land market, and then the government will compete with the private sector, and we will buy land to be distributed. So those are the three elements of the agrarian reform. The second point is rural women. Rural women is a main issue for rural development. And then here, I want to talk about my weakness, care economy. Because care has been ignored by economists. I'm an economist. Our economists all over the world are saying the same thing that Adam Smith, the first economist who talked about care economy, said 300 years ago. You know, care is something that it's only love, so it's only women's. Well, that's a huge mistake. That represents, in Colombia, it represents 20% of GDP. I have to be, not to be humble here. I presented the law that measures care economy. Its value is 20% of GDP, when the rural sector's contribution to GDP is 8%. And the industrial sector contributes with 11% in Colombia. So we are ignoring that. So are we working? And we want to work with rural women. And pay care is not recognized as a development issue. So we want to take, you know what happens? Women occupies 8 hours a day, especially rural women, in care economy that nobody values. And then when you have another activity, people forget about that they are very busy. So they will spend 5-6 more hours, which means that they have 8 + 5, 13 hours a day. Men have 8 hours a day, 8 for leisure and 8 for sleeping. Women are not having leisure. I think women all over the world know that. So we're trying to get some of that, those for example, taking care of children, education, taking care of old people, and get it out so the market of the economy will supply that, and then women will have some free time to be productive. So that's one of my weaknesses. I hope that will be recognized all over the world, but it's not like that in any place. Okay? So now the other point, this is very interesting. In Colombia, there is a big debate about who has the land. And then you listen to big producers saying, come on, the latifundistas are the Indians and the black people. But look at that. The indigenous people have 32, I can't see it here, 32, 33 million hectares. But you know how much are productive? 2.4 million. The rest, they're taking care of our forests. And with the black people, it's the same thing. Black people have 475,000 hectares that are productive, and the other ones are natural forest, 5,259,000. So it's very important. You see it in the red parts of the map. You see that our indigenous people, our black people, are the ones who are taking care of our forests, of our natural resources. They are not latifundistas. This is a very key issue in the debate in Colombia today, because they say they are latifundistas, we should take the land out of them. No, no, no. They have very small part of the land that was assigned to them by law that can be really agricultural productive. Okay. Now the fourth point is change. We have to supply, to include small producers, not as with, as seeing them as poor people that we have to help. No, we have to include them in the supply chain. They have to be part of this development of increasing the production in the rural sector. So we need, of course, by that we'll get food security that needs a lot of efforts in Colombia, but we need innovation where we can learn from you, productive infrastructure, we don't have enough, credit and risk management. We have to do a new way of getting the credit to the very small producers, and we have agricultural extension, something we have having something with you. We have to learn about that from Ireland. And now the fifth point is territorial approach. This is very interesting. The red part of it is where the poor people are. So when you talk about where people are in Colombia, the very, very poor, you see the difference between the center part of Colombia and the coast. Everybody knows that in the Pacific coast, we have the poorest towns. You see, you have in Quibdó, you have in Tumaco and all that. But look where the poor are. The real poor people are in the Atlantic coast. They will say it's a bias because I'm from the Atlantic coast. But that shows that it is true. And you see that the center of the country, they have people have a higher income level. Okay. Now, let's see why we have to work on rural development within the framework of the peace agreement. We have to come back with the peace agreement. It was sort of frozen during the last years. I don't want to criticize anybody, but it's a fact. Okay, let's go to that point. When you see the 6 chapters of the final peace agreement of 2016, you see 3 of them that are clearly linked to rural development. Why renting rural reform? That's the first point of the peace agreement. Then you have the third, bilateral and definite ceasefire defined by the end of hostilities and weapons surrender. We're convinced without peace, no rural development is possible. And chapter 4 is solution for the illicit drug problem. This is, you heard President Petro speech in the United Nations. That's a very aggressive position of Colombia, especially of the president, and we have the problem in the rural sector. We see something very interesting. The producers of coca, they want to move to legal activities. I have been, traveling all over the country in these months. I have traveled half of the time, and I see they are ready to move to legal production, but it's not easy. It takes time. You will have to give them time, let them choose what can they produce. Chocolate, how do you say cocoa? Cocoa, yeah, cocoa, not coca. Okay, and then that takes time because you have to wait 4 to 5 years. So you have to do something, not just fumigate or eradicate. That was not successful. You heard the president. So that's one responsibility we do have. Okay, so let's go on. No, in general terms, why do we have to put all this policy of rural development within the peace agreement? Because land access and formalization of rural production is a point of this agreement, national plans for rural development and territory. We have to move to the different places that Colombia is one of the richness of Colombia to have so many different territories. Okay, now what are we going to do? In a very synthetic way, I would like to show you the main issues. Really, agrarian reform is the big challenge. Nobody believes in that. Nobody wanted to talk about that. We now are committed in that, which means that we have to Colombia has to be, the President Petro has said it all the time, a superpower in agri-food. You know what that means. Then we have to do it within the limits of environment. We have to be very conscious that it's environmental justice what we need. We need social justice. The gap between the urban and the rural in Colombia is huge. We have to start the process of reducing the gap, and we have peace. We need peace. We owe the rural sector that they pay the price of war. So we have to be very aware that we have to pay that debt. And we move then. But I have something very exciting to tell you. Last week, we started the agrarian reform. Look what we did. We formalized 11,295 property titles. We started by legalizing, moving people from illegal possession of land to legal one, which gives them access to all the agricultural policy. We did that it benefit 10 indigenous reservations, 3 community councils, and 2,600 families. But this is the big news. A total of 681,372 hectares they are already being assigned to the people who used to be in an illegal position. That means 4 times the area of vote. So this was our first step. I hope they will be recognized as a big step, believe me. Okay, then why do we have to do this? Because we really have to move to the very different territories we have in Colombia, and we have to do it in sustainable use of natural resources. We have to be very careful about vulnerability, conflict, and the development potential of the region. 3 are the results we expect. First, increase the number of agricultural producers to bring indigenous population, Black people, peasants that live in a very different conditions of the urban population, to bring them to be part of the productive sector. This means we have to provide productive assets. Second, we have to do it in an efficient economic environment. We have to provide public goods. And we have to have sustainable production models, which mean restructuring the way we produce. So after decades of neglect, today rural Colombia is finally a priority. Muchas gracias.
Minister, for your fantastic presentation and for your flexibility with the technological details. We really appreciate it. I'd like to pass the floor now to our Secretary General, Joe Hackett, for his remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Ciara. Minister, thank you very much. Thanks for coming to Ivy House. It's a privilege to have you here. And like Rory was saying at the beginning, having ministerial presence in Ireland, notwithstanding the distances, is hugely important to maintaining the vibrancy of the bilateral relationship. So it's great to have you here. Just to echo the warm comments about Ambassador Cortés and Ambassador Nidonica in Bogota. Both missions are open relatively recently, 2018 in your case and 2019 in ours. And they've both really proved the benefit of embassies and diplomatic work. We have a program in this country called Global Ireland, which is about doubling our presence internationally. And part of that is opening new embassies. And Colombia and Bogota was opened as part of that. And having been there in May with Ciara, it was incredibly reassuring and energizing to see the benefit that could flow from being present on the ground. So just to recognize the two of you. Delighted to have my colleague, another Secretary General, Mary Hurley, here with us today. Mary and I work closely on a whole range of cross-government issues. So really good to have you here today. And Andreas, you're on and off there on the screen from the OECD, but we're now all looking at you on the screen and you're finally connected. So really pleased you're here. I mean, I think it is very timely to have a conference like you're having with the OECD on this topic, but to have it where you're having it is also really important. In a border county, a very interesting, rich and dynamic rural community as well, and many of the issues that you've touched upon there, and many of the issues that concern you as an agriculture minister will be of great interest to people in Cavan, and you'll meet Minister Humphreys when you're there. I was struck when you were speaking there about your priorities that one of the things we heard when we were there and when other ministers heard was that the peace process, of course, had been an incredibly powerful transformative moment, but that it had still left large numbers of the country untouched, and that government wasn't present in a large numbers of the areas, and that this was fundamentally a risk to peace. So your President's approach and commitment to total peace, as you frame it, and the idea of making the hard resource and courageous decisions to show up and be present in places where the government has been absent is something that we strongly support. And anything we can do to support you at the multilateral level, we will do that. We're coming, well, we've still got 3 months to go as members of the Security Council, but we're pleased with the role we've been able to play as a member of the Council on Colombia, and our Minister for Foreign Affairs and your Minister for Foreign Affairs had a very useful discussion around that in New York last week. So look, first of all, the bilateral relationship, as I think everyone here could gather from the tone of your comments, is very positive. Can't take it for granted. So it's important that we have practical initiatives to back it up. And different strands of that at the political level. Again, very often, given how far apart we are, there could be a tendency to have long gaps without political visits. But if you look at the practice of it, our president's been there, and delighted that you had such a positive engagement with him before coming here. Our Deputy Prime Minister, who will be our Prime Minister in December, spent most of St. Patrick's Week in Colombia and had an incredibly positive experience, and very, very energized about the things that we can do. As I say, you're here, we've had our foreign ministers meet. We've had the privilege of having Minister Fian attend the inauguration of President Petro, and with the previous government there was a lot of interaction and visits here as well. So the political piece of government-to-government contact, those of us who are diplomats in the room know that that's kind of fundamental to what we do, and we know all the positive issues and opportunities that flow from that. So that's in good shape. On the trade piece, heading in a really positive direction. I mean, I think we've 153 million in two-way trade in goods, nearly 85 million in two-way trade in services, which is strong compared to the region, and it's something that we can build upon. So the fact that our Deputy Prime Minister was there, who's also our Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, he came back quite enthusiastic about having a significant trade visit to Colombia soon. I don't think there's a date set yet, but it's being planned, and areas for focus there will be in the financial service area, agri-tech, renewable energies. So lots of opportunities. So as I say, important work of any embassy is the bilateral trade piece, and that's good too. Good opportunities on the education side, developing what is maybe an underdeveloped side in the cultural sector, but one I think combined with education is something that we can build upon, what we like to call people-to-people contacts. And I think there's a lot of very strong flows of contact there that we can certainly build upon. And then we have our former Deputy Prime Minister, Eamon Gilmore, who is the EU's representative to the peace process in Colombia. He's really passionate about your country. He's a great advocate for the country here and at EU level. And he's also a great source of information and contact for all of us. Our mission in Bogota is somewhat unusual in that its primary purpose and the great bulk of its activity is around peace support in its broadest sense. So it's a very interesting model for us. I can only really think of our embassy, our mission in Ramallah in Palestine, that would be kind of broadly similar, but it's different. And I found that quite exciting when I was there, because it means we can partner together on shared experiences, but it also means that the mission is involved and connected at a grassroots level right throughout the country, from rural communities, the agriculture sector, to human rights defenders, civil society groups, as well as the more senior political levels. And I think that model has served us really well, and I hope that as you're longer in the role, you can see the benefit of that, but the guidance that you can give and your government can give to the mission is also something we're very receptive to. I like to think we're careful in this country when we talk about shared lessons, that we do so in a humble and respectful way, and that it's never a sense of us telling others what they should do with their peace process. Because no two peace processes are the same, and we've made lots of mistakes, and we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of our peace agreement next year, and those 25 years have been hugely positive because by and large there's been an absence of violence, but we still have a long way to go on the road of reconciliation, and we still have significant challenges, and we can't solve or address those alone. And so the international partnership piece that was fundamental to our original peace agreement remains really important now at a different phase. And that isn't just about the support of countries like the United States or the European Union. It means international partners who have gone through difficult periods in their history and peace processes. And you're very much in our mind when we think of that. We've also kind of, back that up with financial support in your country. I think we did 2 million last year and then 17 million overall in terms of our shared lessons experience. And we want to do more of that, but we want to do the right kind of stuff. So you're a new government. You've got this approach of total peace. We don't want to just do what we've always done. We want to make sure we're independent of you, but we also want to make sure that we're relevant with you. And again, I want to send back that message that we partner together as much as possible. I think something that we find inspirational from your process is the role of women and girls and your commitment to women, peace and security. Various groups of women, civil society groups played an important role in the Irish peace process, but nothing like yours. And the agreement that we have certainly didn't put front and centre and enshrine the role of women that yours has done. So I think that's an aspect that we can learn a great deal from you on. And look, we remain concerned that one of our big foreign policy priorities is human rights defenders. We know that that's a priority for you personally and for your president. And it's something that I think has been a long-standing kind of concern in Colombia, and it's something that we want to support you on. Look, finally, we all live in challenging regions. Obviously, we're managing the consequences of Russia's invasion of Ukraine here, and continue to look to our friends outside of Europe to recognise that conflict for what it is, which is an aggressive and an illegal invasion by one large country over its neighbour. But we're also really conscious of the challenges you face in your region, not least with the number of refugees who have come from Venezuela. And
you can imagine.
I know, and we welcome the initiatives that President Petro has taken to re-establish diplomatic relations, and we're supportive of that. And our two ministers at foreign minister level had a very useful conversation on that last week. So I won't pretend I know lots about agriculture, but I will say Mary knows more than I do about it. So I won't stray in there and overstep my remit. But pleasure to welcome you here, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Joe. Mary, I'm sorry to cut across to you. Before we go to you, we're going to cut to Andres from the OECD, and there's been a technical issue with his connection. So while we have him for a few minutes, we're going to let him come in, which I know goes against Joe's point of placing women at the front and centre of our discussions. But if you'll bear with us for a few moments, we'll let Andres Sanabria from the OECD come in.
Yeah, hello, thank you. And sorry for these technical issues that I think the firewall is messing up with the connection, but not pleased to be with you, and great that we have this conversation just before our OECD Rural Conference. We are flying tomorrow, all the staff, and well, just to mention first that Colombia and the OECD has started a work last year in August regarding the rural policy review. And actually, for that review, we had as a peer reviewers one person from the Minister of Chile, of Agricultural Ministry, and one person from the Minister Andrew Ford, from the Ministry of Rural Development in Ireland. We have with both of them, we have different discussions, different workshops, and we interview people in Colombia from indigenous communities, private sector, academy, etc. And some of the findings that we found in this report is that, well, first, Colombia has been growing almost 3 times faster than the OECD when you see the GDP per capita. But then when you see how this GDP per capita has spread out in the territory, you see that Colombia is the country, at least in 2021, that has the bigger inequality in terms of GDP per capita among regions. So you have the capital city, Bogota, that has a GDP per capita almost 10 times more than other regions like Guainía or other regions that the minister was saying in the coast, like Choco. So one of the needs and the priorities that we see is how the government can make this growth more balanced across regions. And some of the things that we identify, and I think the minister just said that, is the importance of land distribution. That is a big initiative. The importance of information, because right now there is no information in many areas, and Catastro multipurpose is a tool to give that information to the country. But there are other areas and we use for that the example of Ireland, of the rural policy of Ireland, is the coordination across government. Because who is the leader of the rural agenda in Colombia? In this case, is the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. But how this minister can coordinate with other ministers the implementation of sectorial policies in rural areas. For example, broadband, as the minister was mentioning, roads, especially tertiary roads, health, education. So we touched on these points, and these are some of the recommendations. For example, improving the coordination with a type of supraministerial committee to oversee the implementation of rural policy, where the Minister of Agriculture will be the leader. But also how in the implementation, how we deliver the policies to the rural communities. So in that case, also we looking at other good practices from other OECD countries. We recommend an institution, a body at the regional level that can gather the different strategies of the government to don't go in separate ways. I think these are probably some of the main points. This review, probably we are going to discuss that during the conference, touch upon many things. For example, is the first review that uses the OECD principles on rural policy and the OECD framework of rural development. That is a framework that is called Rural Wellbeing, Geographies of Opportunities. So this is a report that focuses more on the opportunities, rural areas in Colombia, as Minister you mentioned, is the second most biodiverse country in the world, one of the countries with more ethnic diversity in Latin America. In terms of renewable energy sources like wind or light, is in a very important position. For bioeconomy, also has very important assets with all the agricultural stock that comes from the production, and we see also many opportunities in tourism and rare minerals. So rural development, looking at more than agriculture and these synergies with other sectors, I think is one of the main messages that we want to take out from this review. That is my intervention. So I'm happy to discuss later in the Q&A.
Thanks, Andres. Thank you for that. And it's interesting, as you said, to talk about the review, as Ireland was a peer reviewer during that process. And Secretary General Mary Hurley is here to tell us more about that and the broader rural and community development picture in Ireland.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you, Andreas and Joe and Minister. I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm very taken with your presentation. Very similar rural issues in Colombia to Ireland, and members of the Diplomatic Corps, ambassadors, delighted to be here. And we'll be seeing Andreas in County Cavan this week, which is a beautiful border county, and you'll have plenty of time to discuss the theme at that conference, which is it's about building resilient, thriving, sustainable rural places. And I suppose that's very much part of the theme that came out of your presentation there. Maybe just to put a bit of context about Ireland and where we're at. Joe mentioned there agriculture, the division of kind of responsibilities across government here. We have a Department of Agriculture, Marine and Food, but we also have a department purely targeting rural and community development. And I suppose one of the things we've seen since the National Planning Framework, which is our framework document about regional development and balanced regional development, is a real focus on people being at the heart of communities, and that bottom-up approach to people designing and building their own area and feeding into that. And I think probably that's quite relevant to yourself in terms of Colombia. Maybe to talk a little bit about what we're doing and some of the issues that you highlighted there. And I think Andreas hit the nail on the head there in terms of some of the shared challenges we have. Rural Ireland and rural Colombia will have that challenge of balancing economic development against the environmental sustainability. We all have that in our rural areas. The connection and the connectivity piece is a huge issue for us in rural Ireland, and I know one that would have come out of the peer review. The piece around building strong communities and that dialogue piece, also a really big ticket item and one that we focus on, and I think we have kind of shared issues there on that too. And I suppose one of the things that we've been trying to do in my department is it's this myth of urban versus rural. In the post-COVID world, there's been huge opportunities for rural Ireland, where during COVID, people worked from home, they stayed in their community, they put processes in place, and they were able to do that. And that's something that we've been focusing on in our department, and the government have been driving, you know, remote working hubs, connectivity, keeping people in their rural area. So I think we've quite a lot of shared agenda items there. Getting back to the peace process and our border counties and rural development, really, unless you have inclusivity and unless you have people, the reconciliation piece that Joe spoke about, people working together, coming from different backgrounds, it won't work. And we have seen in the border counties through our peace programme, initiatives where we've had rural projects where communities have come together and delivered really meaningful, tangible projects for their communities. We see it in our outdoor recreation strategies and our tourism strategies, where you have really powerful tourism products both sides of the border. We have people working together in the rural economy around that. And we see it in terms of a lot of the programs that we operate in now on the shared island. We see rural projects coming through that. And that has been key, I think, in terms of peace building and in terms of communities working together to shape better communities. And you'll see that yourself when you come to Cavan. You'll see some projects where communities have worked together. So that piece, I think, around people working together, around communities understanding and respecting each other, around communities working to make their places better to live in. That has been hugely helpful in terms of reconciliation in our border counties. I think, you know, in terms of listening to the piece around women, I'm very taken with that, because we all know that in terms of poverty, 3/4 of the people in the world that live that are in poverty live in rural areas. And we know that women and children work on the farm or work at home. They're not educated, and their work sometimes isn't valued. And that's a real problem. And that's something we've been working with in our own department, is promoting schemes for women. It's getting women to come together in the rural economy. And that has worked really well. So look, I think a lot of these issues we'll tease out at the OECD conference this week. I think the urban-rural piece, we like to see rural as an opportunity now, not the challenges. It's what people can get out of their community. It's people staying, creating vibrant communities, jobs. It's about services. I might finish on this bit, and Joe alluded to it there as well, and Andreas, the cross-government piece, and it came through in your presentation where you spoke. I think there was a slide around water and around, you know, the cross-government services. That has probably been one of the biggest challenges in terms of joining up the dots across government, and it's something that we've worked very hard to do. And Ireland's policy document, Our Rural Future, that brings it all together. And, you know, it's people in local government talking to people in health, it's rural transport, it's all of the dots joining up. And I think that's something I would say in terms of your strategy. Without that cross-government buy-in and without people understanding their roles and responsibilities and being accountable, it will be very difficult for rural Ireland. So look, just to thank Andreas and Andrew Ford, I know in my own department worked on the peer review, and certainly in terms of the peer review, I know maybe you got a lot out of it, but we also learnt in the department, and we'd like to continue that learning relationship with you and look forward to working with you up in Cavan over the next couple of days, Minister. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. And that was a great way to open the discussion, to speak about the two-way sharing of lessons as well and of experiences as we start this week of exchanges and meetings. So the floor is open. If anybody would like to submit a question via Slido, who's following online.
Could I make a comment?
Please do, please do.
I conceive some key issues. For us, it has been very difficult. It's not easy, let's put it this way, to bring these small peasants, Indians, and Black people that have been marginalized, but then that now have power. They are part of our government. They are part of the Congress. So in one way, you have the ones that had the power before, the big more industrialized agriculture, let's say. They are not used to share. They are used to see these people that you should help, help. But that's not the point. You have to include them in productive terms. That's not easy. But at the same time, people who have been criticized in all their lives, they have been, with a lot of reasons, to feel marginalized, are now part of the government. For example, one of our institutions in the ministry is an Indian leader. And that community is now invading land, claiming their rights. If he does what his community wants, I will be telling him, please stop. We have to protect the law. But if he doesn't do that, his community will be mad with him. So this is a very difficult situation, but it's very rich now. And my colleague from OECD knows that now we are a multiracial society. That's a new Colombia. That was not Colombia before. We thought we were all white and blue eyes. No, we're not. We are multiracial, and that's another country. So we need your help. You know how to deal with this process of peace, which means you have to include other sectors. We need to learn how to dialogue. That's what I'm calling for. I need your country to help us understand and see how dialogue works, because we're learning about that. And at the same time, we have to bring development to these other sectors. You know how to deal with it. You're very successful, for example, with the dairy production. You are very successful to work with the small medium. Of course, I was talking to a leader in Colombia last night about this dairy process, and he said, what is small in Ireland is huge in Colombia. But anyway, you know how to deal with that. So those areas will be very important for us.
Thank you, Minister. You've actually answered our first two questions that came in online, so you anticipated very much the interest in the room. I'd like to see if there's any questions in person in the room before I go to the next one that I have in Slido. Please, you went first. There's a microphone coming to you.
Thank you. My name is Paul Quinn. I'm the Global Head of Peacebuilding and Conflict Prevention for Christian Aid. And my question is for the Minister. We really welcome all of the very ambitious and progressive steps that you want to take with your mandate. And I have a question around the illicit economies and the cocoa production and moving towards a development lens rather than a security lens, and how you think networks of cocoa growers like COCAM or how you will integrate the voices of the most marginalized to ensure that the new kind of land folios, the formalization of land will affect what their needs are, particularly for women who have been left out of a lot of the processes and the previous schemes that were in terms of crop substitution.
Because of the I can't hear very well. Yeah?
To help the cocoa farmers, to especially women who have been cocoa farmers, how in the new projects that the government has.
Yeah. Women, I mean, if we don't do something with rural women, we are losing the battle. Rural women are in the lowest part of the social pyramid in Colombia. They have been outside credit, rural credit, and many issues. So we really have to bring them back. What are their role in the cocoa production? Is something we have to investigate. But in my first trips with rural communities that are cocoa producers, women are very active in developing a more legal system because they feel it. They feel discriminated. They feel their children discriminated. Yeah. So what was a surprise for me, and it's a change for what I saw in the late 90s, is that they're all willing, especially women, to move to a more legal sector, so more legal, and to have access to better education, to give a status to the children, because young people are getting out of the rural sector. Women are getting out of the rural sector. It's the only place that we have more men than women, the rural sector. So women are a key factor to change what we're going to do with cocoa producers and in general terms with rural development.
Thanks. We had one there and then next one here.
Thank you very much. David Butler from Sustainable Food Systems Ireland. We're part of our Ministry of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and we also bring in other parts of our government system. And our day job is to share Ireland's knowledge and expertise and technologies in agriculture and food with our partner countries on a government basis. Thank you very much, Minister, for your presentation. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating to hear more about Colombia. It strikes me that many of the things that you say, we're approaching our agri-food sector on the same basis with a systems-based approach, this emerging thinking on food systems. And some of the lessons that we are learning globally, and this is only emerging thinking, but the approaches in terms of multi-stakeholders, the interdisciplinarity, the trade-offs that are fundamental in systems, in complex systems, whereby what you do in food production impacts on environment, impacts on health and on other areas. So our drivers might be slightly different, and our objectives sometimes and the bases that we're starting from are slightly different, but it strikes me that many of the challenges we face and that our partner countries face are exactly very similar to the challenges that you're facing, and it's the kind of systems thinking that is emerging in relation to agri-food is something that will be beneficial, I think, in addressing some of these challenges. So we'd be very interested, just as a comment, to share that going forward in terms of what we're seeing in terms of food systems and our food systems approach with you. Albeit your objectives are slightly different, but many of the things are the same. The importance of agri-entrepreneurship, the roles of previously marginalized communities, marginalized actors, the importance of strengthening value chains, etc., knowledge transfer, extension systems, all of these. So we're working on similar ends, albeit the drivers might be slightly different. So I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and say I think there's much that we can share from the agriculture and food side as well. Thank you.
I'm sure I want to be that I understood everything.
I think we might follow up with those comments in writing. We can explain. It's not a question, a positive, supportive comment on our agricultural sector. So we can brief you afterwards. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That actually fits in with one question we received online, which I might ask Mary Hurley to talk about from the Irish perspective, and then the Minister about the role of the private sector in what we're talking about. Yes,
comment about the private sector. One of the difficulties, and this is very interesting for OECD, for our dear member of this OECD, we cannot ignore what the private sector means in the rural areas. You know, for example, flour export. That was a private initiative. It was not a government policy. It was a private initiative who started the flour export and flour production. And now it's one of the main products we did. So at a certain point, the government came and helped this, but this was coming from the private sector. So when this group of people that have been ignored come to be an object of public policy, it's very hard to tell them that you cannot ignore what is going on with the private sector. So one of the things that's why the chain production is very important, because when they come to me, for example, there is a big discussion about seeds, if you import genetic transformed seeds or not. Very traditional people, indigenous people are saying, no, let's just work with national, the seeds that are produced by peasants. Of course, if you do that, you cannot produce, for example, maize or cotton. You need that transformed genetic seeds. So what I tell them is, okay, you need your seeds. The big producers of rice, for example, maize, that we have to substitute imports. I tell them, okay, we will help you with that. We will give that debate in Congress, which I have done already. But what are you going to do with the small producers? Yeah? And then they say, listen, if you have less than 20 hectares, you cannot use mechanization. I say, okay, just tell me how many hectares you need. 20? Okay, let me get producers. I need to join 15, 20 small producers, or 30. Okay, we'll do it. To have some sort of a cooperative, you call it? Okay, and we will take new credits for cooperatives. So we will bring these producers that we have to make a group of them, and then you will have mechanized agriculture. So that's the mix we have to do between the private sector and this small sector. So I tell them, for example, the big producers, I don't want your foundations to just give books to the small children, to the children of your workers. No. Okay, we will work for better education for them. What we need is that you that you open the productive system so they can be part of your process. It not only produce the basic agricultural product, but move to agro-industry. Why can't they be your partners? We will finance as government their contribution, but you have to accept that they'll be part of the process of agro-industry. So that's the joint venture. It's not easy, but I have found that the private sector started to understand. What is difficult is the other sector that wants to see that it is really like that. So we are in that process. If you know about that, please tell us. This is a huge challenge.
Thank you. Mary, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I suppose you've said it all really there. I suppose in terms of the rural economy, the small producers and rural enterprise, one of the things was we've been focusing on in Ireland is to try grow that economy. And there's always complexities and challenges. One of the big pieces, and last week we had our national ploughing championship, so it was a pity you weren't here last week. So if you had gone to that, you would have seen the huge private sector industry and the rural piece there in terms of how that joins up with the smaller food producer. One of the things in our rural future, our government's policy document, is around bringing private sector companies and organisations into rural Ireland as a means of jobs. So it's diversification. It's not just about rural enterprise, it's about also locating jobs in the rural area so you can keep people in their community. So that's a big piece as well. So yeah, I think we're quite similar.
I know we had a question here in the front. The mic is coming to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Mari Skåre. I'm the Norwegian ambassador to Ireland. It's a great pleasure listening to you and to the whole panel. Very interesting discussions. And I also went to the ploughing championship last week, and that was also very much a learning experience about agriculture practices and about the importance of women in agriculture. I noticed, of course, that rural reform is such a central piece of the peace agreement implementation. So I think that is very valued. It's so central in the implementation of the peace agreement. And also, of course, the recognition of women that goes unrecognized in agriculture, rural areas, and the importance of providing that recognition. But I would still think that the holding of land rights, land entitlements is really important. I would like you to perhaps elaborate a little bit about how this reform is going to ensure that women has the right to land. And I can share with you that in Norway, only 3% of our quite large land mass is agricultural land, and it's family business. Only 60% of the farmers are female, right? And I spoke with a farmer friend of mine, and she made the exact point as you that, so much of our work is going unrecognized. But still, it's a point, I think, for our societies to make sure that women has the same access to land rights as men. So I would like to hear you, tell us a little bit more in detail about that. Thank you.
This is one of the huge challenges. Since I was vice minister in the 80s, I was trying to change the idea that land is only for men. And I have to confess that I have been unsuccessful. The only thing that we got was that women and men will share the property, which is nothing. In a male chauvinist society, all the world is male chauvinist, come on. But here in developing countries is even more. So that is not the way we should do it. We only have 20% of the women that are working in the rural sector that have land properties with quotes, yeah? So we really have to move, because it's not only land. If you don't have the land rights, you don't have credit, you don't have technical assistance, it's very difficult to have anything. So in the process of legalizing, you brought up something that I have to go back and do. How many of these legal titles will go to women? I am sure there are very few. So you brought the point, and I will go back and look at that. And I promise you, I think we will need more enforcement of laws that already exist. So, but this, in the process of legalizing that, we have to, if we're going to follow what the peace process says, we have to legalize 7 million hectares, and we have to distribute 3 million new land to these people. So I will be sure that we will make all the efforts to get that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister. I think that's about all the time for questions that we have today, as you have a busy agenda and a busy week. I think you've probably given us more food for thought and more things to take away and work on than you are taking back, but I think it's been a really interesting exchange. I'd like to invite you, if you'd like to say anything else to finish the discussion, and then we will bid everyone a good afternoon.
Well, I'm very grateful. I have a wonderful meeting with the President. Your President is a very humanistic man that is sensitive to peace processes. He knows Colombia, he knows Latin America, he has friends in our region, and he was very excited about our president's discourse in the United Nations. I told the president, I immediately wrote, President Petro, you know something? President of Ireland is very pleased with the way you treated the drug issue, which, is one of the main problems. So, and thank you so much for your words, for opening this space for Colombia. It's a privilege for the minister to talk to a president of a country. This was very generous of your president, and it's not usual to have the opportunity in the political diplomatic sphere to have the opportunity to share our worries and our challenges. So it was a great pleasure. I hope this will be translated in more cooperation, and we want to see more Irish people in our country.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, everybody. That's us done for today, and we hope to see you at another event.